Hey everybody, happy Wednesday evening, and I trust that I have something that might be of interest tonight. This is a sujihiki that I restored over the weekend. I'm about to do the second sharpening on it to get it even more refined than it was, because I tend to find that when I spend a long time doing grunt work on a blade, that when I get down to the fine work, it's usually rushed, and I don't get quite the result that I want. But I want to assure you that even in rough form and after having prepped several meals, it's not dull. I mean, it's not great, but it's not dull. But I think this can get a lot better. So that's what we're doing tonight. I shamefully neglected to take before pictures on this, but it came to me looking very much like this one, which I have not touched yet. This is a kind of a larger version of the same knife shape, probably made about the same time in a very similar manner in Japan. So basically imagine this turning into this, and this suffices as a before picture. So this knife is a sujihiki, or slicing knife. Well, this one has a fairly deep blade for sujihiki, and it can double for some chopping. It can be a nice little kind of a slender gyoto, kind of all-purpose thing. And I plan to use this for my sushi prep this weekend, because I am currently refining the geometry on my prized Aritsugu Yanagaba, which I got to a very good state of restoration and extremely sharp. But after some use, I decided it could be a little better. So I'm working on that, and I don't want to rush it. So this is a knife that has what we call an asymmetrical double bevel. So you can see the main bevel down at the bottom. It's not particularly shiny right now because I've been doing some food prep and stuff, so it has a bit of patina on it. But I think you can see it. But on the back side, you see very little. Excuse me. Japanese asymmetrical double bevels are basically hybrids of classic Japanese single bevel knives, like this large Deba, which has all of the angled bevel on one side of the knife, and the back side of the knife is actually ground on a concave manner, and you can just see the little very shiny edge all the way around the edge of the blade, and that's the only part that touches the stone. So double bevel, single bevel, classic single bevel type profile, extremely sharp. And the asymmetrical double bevel was a blend between that concept and the typical sort of Western chef knife, which is completely symmetrical. That is, the blade is ground equally on both sides. This is an old American carbon steel double bevel chef knife that I previously restored. So simply for illustrative purposes, this is an old Dexter, a 10-inch American vintage carbon steel chef knife, which actually I like very much, by the way. Love this texture. So let's put some stuff out of the way here. And what I'm going to do tonight is to resharpen this freshly restored sujihiki. And it's not dull, but it could be better. Fresh off the sharpening and stropping, this knife scored a 78 on the best testing machine, which is pretty respectable, but I think it can do a lot better. I routinely get Japanese knives down in the 40s, and I also noticed by the time I did the 8,000 grit stone, and then stropped it on leather with 1 micron, which is approximately 16,000 grit diamond emulsion, Gunny Juice brand, by the way. Major props for Gunny Juice for making a great product. I noticed that some of the striations from my core stones were still in the bevel, which means I did not fully polish them out as I went to finer stones. So I'm starting with 400 grit tonight. The goal here is just simply to polish out all that stuff from my core stones that I didn't get before. So asymmetrical double bevel knives do get sharpened on both sides. They typically get sharpened at quite a low fine angle on the right side of the knife, which is where the main part of the bevel goes. And then on the other side of the knife, you get a very small bevel, but typically a couple of degrees higher. And I have found that type of sharpening delivers an extremely fine and sharp edge, but helps the knife when you cut. It doesn't tend to drift on you. It tends to make a very straight cut. And again, you know, those Japanese knife makers are kind of a genius for coming up with this kind of geometry, because it delivers a fineness of edge that is almost on a par with single bevel knives, combined with the greater durability and ease of sharpening of Western style double bevel knives. So here we go. And by the way, my phone cannot seem to make up its mind about how it will chop up my videos. So one time I may make a video and I may let it run for half an hour, and another time it'll start chopping it up at 11-minute intervals. And so this will most likely encompass several videos, but I hope the entire thing will not be more than a half an hour. Since this knife is already sharp and well defined, this is just a refinement. I have a number of stones lined up here that I'm going to be working on. So the majority of sharpening with an asymmetrical double bevel is done on the right side of the knife. And so we're just going to go ahead and get right to it. And all I'm doing on this 400 stone right now is basically I'm polishing out the larger scratches that were left post-polishing last time. Because I went from my new Veneve 240 grit diamond resin bonded diamond stone straight to my Suihiro Dabato 1000 grit ceramic whetstone. And the Dabato is an absolutely badass stone, but there are limits to what a 1000 grit stone can realistically polish out unless you spend just hours and hours and hours sawing away at it. So all I'm looking for right now is to raise a little burr. So once we get through this 400 grit stone, things should go very quickly. And I can already probably see now any remaining glimmer of gloss is knocked off this bevel, but I think you can see the bevel very clearly, a little strip about this wide down at the bottom. And typically when I sharpen an asymmetrical double bevel like this, I tend to lay the main bevel, the right side bevel, over at a very steep angle. So I'm sharpening this right now. This is about a 9 or 10 degree angle on the right side of the knife. Now when I get over on the left side of the knife, that bevel is very small, and takes a very short amount of time, but I also raise that angle just a little bit higher. And that, I have found, not only gives me a little bit sturdier edge and better edge retention, but it also aids in the tracking of the knife. Since most of the bevel is on the right side, the knife will tend to push to the left when you cut through food. Having a tiny but kind of diminutive little slightly higher angle right side bevel kind of tends to diminish that just a little bit. After this pass, I'll kind of demonstrate with my hands what I'm talking about. Should be getting very close to raising a burr, which is the goal here. By the way, pro tip, whenever you're sharpening carbon steel knives, put a little baking soda in your water, and then you don't have to worry about rust popping up on your blade while you're sharpening. So, if you think of a single bevel knife, pretend that this is the right side of the knife. It's like this, right? It's like a chisel. A double bevel is like this, usually a little like that. So the whole idea of the asymmetrical double bevel is that you have this over here, but then you have just a little bit like this, and then goes up flat. And the whole shape of the knife is ground to accommodate this kind of thing. So it's much more curved on this side and very flat on this side. What I do, I like to have a very shallow angle on the right side of the knife, and then on the left side of the knife, this little bitty shelf here, which is a little lower angle. I should have drawn some things on paper, so instead of like doing crazy semaphore on my knife videos, I could just whip out a sheet of paper and go, here's what it looks like. But I hope you get the idea. But let's keep sharpening, because I don't want this to take all night. Don't mean a thing if you ain't got that burr. Excuse me. Starting to feel it. I can already see, because this bevel was already, and by the way, I spent a lot of time grinding this bevel out on my coarsest implements. I had to remove a lot of steel to make this bevel. It's not shiny now. It certainly will be. So I get through on this 400 grit stone. It's going to go very quickly. I love this 400 grit stone. It's a generic American-made stone. Probably goes under multiple brand names. I bought it from sharpeningsupplies.com, which is a really good company that I buy a lot of my, sharpening supplies from. Gosh, this is looking so good. I can't believe I don't have a bevel yet. Apparently, when I sharpened it last time, probably in a huge rush, I must have really rolled the edge over. And that's really no surprise given the hurry I was probably in by the time I got to the finished sharpening. And that's why, for me, the second sharpening almost always yields far superior results. Alright, I'm just starting to feel the pre-burr couple more passes, and then I'm going to go on the right side and see if I bring a burr over. This knife, I think I mentioned, knocked out a 78 on the best machine, straight off the strop, which is pretty darn respectable, especially for a hurried post-restoration initial sharpening job. Oh yeah, just about to apex the edge. It's very even all the way down. I can't even tell you how proud of the fact I am that it's taking more passes than I thought to achieve a burr on this grit, but the fact that I am almost achieving the burr equally down the entire length of the bevel is a source of enormous pride to me. So anyway, your typical out-of-the-box premium cutlery knife, something that costs, let's say, well over $100, a Wusthof chef knife, a top line Hinkles, factory Japanese knives right out of the box. They will tend to score somewhere in the, say, 200 to 350 range on the best machine. Your typical out of the box utility razor blade, like a box cutter, will score like 150 to 200. And typically anything below 100, like 50 to 100 range, is like a razor that you would shave with, like a barber straight razor or something. So scoring in the high 70s is not bad at all. But I've had knives score as low as 24, so my standards are perhaps a little inflated. And also I plan to be using this knife this weekend for sushi prep while my prized Inagabas are still sort of under construction, to fully restore them to their potentiality. It's very important, by the way, when you're sharpening. Oh yeah, we're almost there. So now it's time to put a brief pass on the other side and see if it raises a burr back on the right side of the knife. So with an asymmetrical double bevel, we do about 80 to 90% of our sharpening on the right side of the knife, or on the left side if you're dealing with a lefty knife, but I'm a righty, so mine are all done in the traditional manner with most of the bevel on the right side. Perks of being a right-hander when you're dealing with traditional or semi-traditional Japanese knives. Oh yeah, I'm feeling that. So we're almost there. We're almost there. Let's do one more quick, easy pass on the left side. And by the way, I will not be remotely offended if y'all skip through this. By the time I get these posted, my phone will have spliced all this into several videos, so feel free to skip around and get what you want out of it. If you're just really digging what I'm doing here and you want to watch the whole thing, well, of course, by all means, be my guest. By the way, please support your local ska reggae rocksteady band. Okay, shameless plug over. Yes, I put this t-shirt on just for the video. We also have these t-shirts for sale, so if you can't live without one, hit me up. I'll hook you up. Excuse me. Boy, we're homing in on it. I've got a false spur all the way down. A false spur, you're working on coarser stones, which this 400 is very smooth and refined for a 400, and it's because it's so hard and it only sheds its particles very reluctantly. It stays very flat, so it's extremely refined 400 grit stone. And it's so funny because all the other stones in the same series as this one that I bought are all just soft and they dish out and they just kind of a royal pain in the ass to work with. In fact, I've relegated them to beater stone status, and I use them for very specific purposes. Okay, yes. You can kind of hear it. Alright, need a little bit more here. I think we're about 3 passes away from perfection here. Beautiful. Feel it. What happens with a false spur? This is very common on coarser stones, especially anything under 400 grit. What happens is you have this blunt. Let's pretend we're looking through a microscope, and this is a blunt edge of a knife. As you begin sharpening it, bringing it toward a crisp apex, the stone holds a little wire of metal. When you sharpen, let's say this side, the stone, the abrasion, a little wire of metal gets folded over. Once you have a perfectly crisp apex, this wire will be like this. But what happens with coarse stones is you can be kind of there, and you get just a little bit of wire hanging over the edge. And you think, I feel a burr. I'm done. Time to move on to the intermediate stone. No, sorry. It's not how it works. And what constitutes a false burr versus a real burr boils down to feel and experience. But I can tell you 100% that I was seduced by many false burrs early in my sharpening days. Alright, we got it right here. False burrs are such a tease. You start to feel that little lip there, you start to be able to hear it, you scrape your thumb across it, and you get that you think, I've got a burr. I've got a burr. I am there. I am ready to move on. Let's put this coarse stone away and get my sexy Suihiro Debato 1000 grit out. Well, you might or you might not be there. Getting pretty close here. Okay. Let's do another one on this side. One of the ways that you can easily distinguish a real burr from a false burr is how easily it trades back and forth. So, if you're feeling a burr on the one side, if you make a pass on the other side, does it instantly flip the same feel over to the other side? And in this case, the answer is no. You can, the bevel on this side is so tiny and thin that I'm not even sure you can see it. I can see it, but the lighting is in my favor, and I also know what I'm looking at, and I'm also looking at it right at it. One thing's for sure, thanks to all this grinding I'm doing to get the burr to really refine this apex, I will totally polish out those striations from the diamond stone that I was talking about earlier. It's so close. So on this side, my angle is raised just a little higher. I would say on the left side, on the right side of the knife, I'm laying at perhaps 9 to 10 degrees, which is why this bevel is so wide. This knife is not terribly thick down there, but I'm laying over at such a shallow angle that it's making a big, wide bevel. But on the left side of the knife, where the tiny burr is, it's like a tiny little shelf of a bevel, and I'm at probably 12 to 13 degrees. It's very important to, as you're sharpening either side of the knife, it's very important to move your pressure fingers so that you sharpen the whole thing evenly. You can't just keep one hand at the heel and one hand at the tip and do that. It does not work that way. Don't do that. Just trust me on that. Okay. I think we're there. I'm trading the burr back and forth. So I'm going to deburr the left side of the knife so that when I go to the next stone, I'll have a clean slate, so to speak, because I'm going to begin on the right side of the knife. And yes, my one stropping pass there, my one deburring pass did succeed in shifting the burr entirely to the other side of the blade, all the way down. So, time to put the stone aside. I'm going to put the stone holder in the water. Since I have baking soda in my water, I don't really have to dry the knife. I'm not really worried about rust popping up on it, but that might be interesting. So here's the current level of polish. It's the 400 grit. It's a very toothy edge right now, but like I said, that 400 grit gives a very refined, it's very hard, very slow wearing, gives a very refined scratch pattern. So now we move on to the Suihiro Tabata 1000 grit, and from here it should go pretty easily. And this is the intermediate stone. This is where we really make the shape. We get it really, really crisply defined on this stone, and get the edge very refined and toothy and beautiful. And then everything else is polishing at this point. This is a splash and go stone, which means that adjust this camera angle so you can see the whole stone. Which means I don't need to soak it. That 400 grit stone is a soaking stone, and happens to be a very thirsty one at that. So I had that soaking for a while before we got started. So again, I like to begin my pressure at the tip. Tips of knives, because of the curvature up there, which is typical, tend to be the hardest to sharpen. And so I really like to begin at the tip, and then I find as I walk my way down toward the heel of the knife, it just gets easier and easier. So you can already see the black on the stone. That's basically the metal that the stone is cutting away. And by the way, I'm not sure what steel this knife is made of. Undoubtedly, I mean, it's certainly some form of fine Japanese carbon steel. I doubt very much that it is up in the rarefied air of shirogami or aogami, the very highly revered Japanese white and blue carbon steels, which are used on premium knives. I tend to suspect that this knife was built to be more of a workhorse, probably not all that expensive when it was new. But I'm here to tell you that even sort of generic Japanese carbon steel used to cutlery is pretty badass. It's extremely hard. I can tell you that when I was sanding the rust off this blade and getting it a little bit polished up, I can tell you that the sandpaper, despite the fact that I get like super premium sandpaper for steel that's super aggressive, that even my 80 grit sandpaper had just a hell of a time biting into the steel at all. And that's how hard and fine it is. Okay, let's check for a burr. This should go fairly quickly now. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. You know you've done your work on your core stones well. When you get to your intermediate stone, your 1000 grit, maybe let's say anything from like 800 through 1500-ish grit, depending on the stone, because every stone has different characteristics. When you make one or two passes and feel that burr, you know you have put a good apex on that edge, core stone. And all you're doing now is refining it. So you can, I think perhaps you can already see we're at a much higher state of polish on this bevel now. And this Sujihiki Debato 1000 is an amazing polisher for a 1000 grit stone. I'm going to do one more pass just to make sure. It's an amazing stone. It cuts like a beast. This thing cuts like a beast for its grit level, but still delivers an extremely smooth and refined and polished scratch pattern. It's really an amazing stone. Totally worth the money. And it's not cheap, I can tell you that. Alright. A beautiful polish developing. Let me wipe this off so you can see. Well, let me sharpen the other side first briefly. This should take like probably one pass. It's funny that I can see the polish clearly. Oh yeah. Getting a great apex all the way down. Yes, very good. It's funny that just standing here over the knife in